Hey guys, it's April and welcome back to my channel. I've got my bachelor's degree in criminal justice and a minor in psychology, and I'm going to say that for the next 40 videos because I'm just so proud of myself. And on top of that, I am a board member for a nonprofit called Voices for the Silenced, and we help missing people and their loved ones around the West Virginia area get resources or anything they need in aid to help their search for them. So if you have someone missing around West Virginia that you care about, please get a hold of us and we'll do what we can. And we are here with another one in the Unsolved in West Virginia series. And I'm sure, as you can tell from the title, we are going to be talking about Jaleayah Davis. Now, I would like to preface this by saying, please be kind in the comments. This case can get heated. When people feel strongly about this case, they definitely let people know. This case is very much innocent until proven guilty. None of the people we'll be talking about have ever been held accountable for any crime in this video. I'm just a girl with Google and in the YouTube search bar, so please, whatever you do, go do your own research on this case before you form an opinion. This is just here for educational and conversational purposes only for, me and my subscribers or anyone that comes across this channel. So yes, please do your own research, talk to people about it, fill out a FOIA request and get the case file yourself. Let's just get right in. Jaleayah was an extremely happy person. She liked to have a good time. She liked going out with her friends, and she especially was close with her family, including her mom and sister. Tommy and Jaleayah were very close in age, so they were pretty much inseparable. And they lived in this mid-valley area that consisted of them living in Marietta, but it was just right across the bridge to get to Parkersburg, West Virginia, which is where this case is going to take place. And I won't be saying anybody's last names. That's not Jaleayah's family or law enforcement. And I mean, their last names are out there. You can find them really easily. But I just would feel better since they've never been charged or law enforcement has made it pretty clear they'll never be looked into. I just would like to keep their privacy. So Jaleayah had met a girl named Kristen, and Kristen and her hadn't known each other long, maybe for about 3 or 4 months, and they were those types of friends that just seemed to bicker all the time, but still hung out and had a good time together. Then this is one of the nights that Jaleayah decided to spend with Kristen. Just so I don't have to keep saying it throughout the events of this night, Jaleayah did text Hobby pretty much the whole time she was out. She had also been texting other people, so she had been in a constant communication outside of just who she was with. And around 5 p.m. on the 19th, Jaleayah went to Kristen's house to start getting ready and pre-gaming a little bit. Around 9:30, they had arrived at a guy named Brian's house that they were going to hang out at before they ended up going to a bar later. Now, Jaleayah didn't know Brian before going to his house, and Kristen only knew him a little bit. Kristen knew him because he was friends with one of her friends named Freddie. Now, around 10:30 p.m., Freddie, Kristen, and Jaleayah left Brian's house to go get their friend Katie. But then they all ended up going back to Brian's house and drinking for a little bit longer. So around 12:30, 1 a.m., they got into Freddie's car and left to go to the bar, the Nip and Q. They ended up just leaving Jaleayah's car at Brian's house. Now around 3 a.m., they did end up leaving the Nip and Q because it was closing and went back to Brian's house. Now I have seen that they might have stopped at Freddie's before this, but I couldn't get any definitive answers on that. And Jaleayah had been texting this guy named Chris that she had been seeing at the bar that night. But the thing about Chris was that this was actually Katie's ex. So there could have been a little bit of tension between Jaleayah kind of hanging out and, from what I understand, dancing with Chris that night while she was hanging out with Katie. Now around 3:20 a.m., Jaleayah did call a friend that I'm going to leave the name completely out of because they have no part in this case. But this person did say that they could hear Kristen in the background of the call. So at 3:20 a.m., she was at least for sure still with Kristen. Now around 3:27 a.m., Freddie was seen on security footage at McDonald's getting food. Now in his car, it does kind of look like there's two other people in there, like in the passenger seat and then like in the back seat, like right behind the driver. But you couldn't tell who they were at all. You couldn't even tell if it was like a boy or a girl. Now just a minute later at 3:28 a.m., Jaleayah calls Toby. She asked if Toby could go pick her up at this gas station, and you could still hear Kristen in the background at this point too. And you could hear Jaleayah telling Kristen to give her her keys. So it was clear she was still with Kristen at this time too. It was clear there was some type of tension going on between them, but they were friends that bickered all the time. So for a lot of people, this could have honestly just seemed normal. So Jaleayah told Toby to pick her up at the gas station on Rosemar Road and Emerson. So Jaleayah calls Toby back at 3:30 a.m. completely hysterical. She's saying that Kristen's a bitch and a bad friend and just pretty much going off. And she asked Toby if she could pick her up at the rest area on the interstate near mile marker 181. Toby asked her what was wrong because it was clear with her hysterically crying that there was something in fact wrong. But Jaleayah just said she would tell her when she got there. And then at 3:36 a.m., Jaleayah did call Toby one more time, but Toby missed that call. She didn't answer and she didn't even know it rang, honestly. So then 3 911 calls ring through. Now, I want to read you the transcripts of these 911 calls because each of them is actually very interesting. You learn quite a bit from them. The first 911 call came through at 3:41 a.m. 911, what's your emergency? Yeah, I'm calling about a car that's broke down on 77 North. Okay, we're at on I-77. On the 181 or so. The lights are on. It's up against the guardrails. Something's going on there, but I couldn't see anybody. It's pretty cold out, so I don't know what's going on over there. Can you give me a vehicle description, like a red car or a blue truck? Pardon me? Can you give me a vehicle description, like a red car, blue truck? All I know is it's a car. He had his lights on. He's right by the car. He's up against the guardrail, so there's something going on over there, but I couldn't see anybody standing around. So, you know, the car or the people I couldn't see, but the lights on in the car, so something's going on over there. Can I have your name, sir? Can I have your name? And then the call ended. Now, people did think this was suspicious at first, but looked into it really was just kind of a freak coincidental accident. The second 911 call came through at 3:48. Stay in the vehicle. I'm going to keep the doors locked. Just stay in here. 911, what's your emergency? Sir, I'm at the 181.6 mile marker, northbound on I-77. I cannot make a confirmation of this right now. I'm walking back. I think I just seen a human being laying dead on the highway, sir. Okay, and you walked away from your vehicle? I'm getting out of my vehicle and I'm walking back where I seen the person. And you think you're at 181? 181 mile marker, sir. I haven't confirmed it yet. Okay, what's your name, sir? My name is... We drove by and you know how it's dark and you can't see, but I'm just pretty sure it might have been a person. Gosh, I really don't want to walk back here. You know what I'm saying? I understand what you're saying. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, sir, you don't have to. Stay where you're at and I'll have somebody come there. I'm getting closer to it. I'm hoping it's a deer, sir. I really am, but I'm pretty sure I saw what I saw. Aw, man, in fact, here's some other people. I don't know if you're getting more phone calls. 2 other guys just stopped down here at the bottom of the hill. Aw, man. Okay, sir, do you know your cell phone number? Is it? I'm getting closer to it. Oh man, I'm hoping it's a deer. I'm hoping I can't. I got my boy. And anyway, when hit, did you pull alongside the guardrail, sir? Yes, sir, I pulled alongside the guardrail. There is a chemical tanker truck that's just pulled over. I'm getting closer to it. There is a semi-tanker truck that's coming at me right now. No, stay over there, truck driver. Stay over here. Stay over here. Oh my gosh, I can't get over here in traffic. Yes, sir. Confirmation, human body. Oh my gosh. Do you want to check to this if this person is still alive or breathing? Sir, there are parts of him I can't. Oh my God. Oh my God. Yes, sir. Turn around and don't look at him. Okay, turn around and don't look at him. Oh my God, sir, you need to hurry up and get people here, please. Okay, we got people on the way out to you, sir. Can I start stopping traffic? This might be a crime scene, right? Do you have a flashlight? I don't want you getting hit. Yes, I do. No, another person just about hit him. Oh my God. If you can get the county sheriff department here as soon as possible, sir. Sheriff department is on its way. So is the fire department and an ambulance. Okay, there's a tanker driver who just pulled in front of me. There is a vehicle. I can't. Can anybody turn their hazard lights on? Put as much light on the situation as you can, okay? Well, most of us are already past it, sir. I'm getting kind of like, sir, this is a crime scene. I'm just about positive. I see this is a crime scene, sir. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. This is unreal. This is unreal. This is unreal. Sir, you said you had your son with you? Yes, my son is with me. Kind of like a crime scene. He's not out there walking around with you. See his shirt? There's his head and skull right there. See it? Oh. Is the head attached to the body? No, sir. Part of the head is right over here. I need you to get over to the right. Over to the right. Make sure you tell him. The sheriff department is here. He's getting ready to block both lanes, sir. Okay, sir. You go ahead and talk to that deputy. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. That's rough. And then the third 911 call comes in at 3:52 a.m. 911, what's your emergency? Has anybody called in it's in Wood County on the Interstate 182, right before 182. Looks like somebody busted a deer. They got I'm sorry, what? It's 182 northbound, Interstate 77. Looks like somebody hit a deer. There's a couple of trucks on the side keeping people away from the deer. There's a car by the guardrail. I don't know if anybody. Okay, it's around 182. Yes, just right before 182 northbound. Okay, we've got deputies on the scene out there, sir. Okay, I just went by and there wasn't anyone there, so I just thought I'd call. Okay, thank you. And that was end of that recording. All right, so let's get into the scene of the accident. As you can tell from the 911 calls, this is pretty graphic. So if that's going to bother you, I would pretty much just leave the video now. Unfortunately, Jaleayah's car wreck was horrific, so there's going to be some very unsettling details discussed. As you heard on the 911 calls, when the police arrived, they immediately started shutting down the interstate. Now, near the guardrail, there was brain matter found in the sand around it, and when measured, it looked like her head ran along the posts of the guardrail for around 90 feet. And then there was blood around the tire marks near this guardrail pretty much the whole way. And also what is interesting about the guardrail is there was really no damage to it. She was naked from the waist up. She had been decapitated and her face had been removed from most likely running across the road. Her right breast seemed to be ripped off in this way also. Her arms were above her head and her leg was completely broken in half. Now, her jeans inside the crotch area on the upper thighs had been ripped on both sides. And on the left leg of the pants from above the knee to the ankle on the front side of the jeans was completely ripped out. And on the right pant leg, the front upper thigh had a rip in it and the back upper leg had a rip in it. And then the seam on the outside on her bottom leg was completely ripped. Now, her coat had no tears on the outside, which is a little weird, right? But there was a 2-inch tear on the shoulder. The hood was missing and the material around where the hood was missing was frayed, like it had been ripped off. The sleeves were not turned inside out as if it had been ripped off the body. It was more like someone had helped take it off of her. And the right armpit of the coat was also ripped, but not the left. left. Now, inside the jacket, there was a heavy amount of blood around where the hood area was. Now, the blood did look like it was almost smeared down the rest of the jacket because it kind of tapered off the closer it got to the bottom. Now, the shirt had one side that was completely ripped out, and then the other side had two little tears. And then the whole left side of the bra was ripped underneath the armpit, but the hooks usually gave out before the fabric of bras, so people did think this detail was a little weird. And then there was blood going down both cups of the bra. Now, her upper body clothes were found laying on the guardrail, and it was in a really weird position when you think about it. Now, when you look at them, it looks like they were placed there, especially when it's bra and then the shirt and then the coat. If they were ripped off of her in a horrific car wreck, they would have been ripped off in the opposite order. Her coat would have landed first, then her shirt, and then her bra. Her car was found about 100 feet down the road away from where the wreck seemed to have started. And there were absolutely no brake marks on this road. It was still running. It was still in gear. The headlights and dome light in the car was on. It was locked, and a CD had ejected out of the radio system. And there was blood on the shift plate. There were fingerprints on the window of the car, and there was no clothing fibers or even DNA found on this passenger side car window that was close to the guardrail. Now, only the driver's side airbags deployed, the passengers did not. And this made law enforcement think that she must have been the only one in the car. But also what's interesting is there's hardly any airbag dust in the evidence photos at all. Now, there was blood all over the bottom of this car. It was even in the headlights, it was in the grill, it was all underneath. There was brain matter around where the tires are. There was blood on the driver's side door handle, a little on the muffler, and inside the fender. Her purse was just on the passenger seat, which makes you think if she hit this guardrail so hard it made her fly out the passenger side window, how in the world did this purse just not look like it was moved at all? Or was it put there later? And now the worst part is the fact that Toby was coming to meet her sister. So Toby did at some point show up to this scene when they were dealing with Jaleayah on the road still. Toby ended up seeing her sister in this state, and it was absolutely horrific. She did end up calling her mom and letting her mom know too, and I just cannot even imagine what this family went through seeing her like that. Now let's get into initially what the police thought. They initially did say this scene looked suspicious, but they did say that it looked like she had been struck by her own vehicle and that she went end to end, possibly spinning. But a lot of people do believe that she was drugged by her car for about 80 feet. Now, getting into her autopsy, the first thing that people usually talk about is the fact that her blood alcohol level was a 0.19, which is extremely intoxicated and over double the limit of driving in West Virginia. She would have been barely able to walk, most likely, let alone drive. And with advanced testing, they were able to figure out that if she would have not passed away at this time, her blood alcohol level would have probably gotten up to a 0.24, which is 3 times the legal limit of driving in West Virginia. And her friends had said that she did drink around 16 shots, but if everybody's out drinking, that could easily have been exaggerated, right? And now for someone who had been struck by their vehicle, there was no car paint on her at all. There was no airbag residue on her clothes, which made people think that maybe she wasn't in the car when the airbag went off, let alone in the seat the airbag went off in. There was also no airbag residue found in her hair. Her right ankle was broken and had a cut across it, and above it there was a burn, but it didn't look like road rash. It almost looked like her ankle had been held to like the muffler or something. Now I'm going to tell you what the police's official story was based on the crime crime scene and the car. They think Jaleayah was driving alone on Interstate 77 and she was talking on the phone to Tabi at this point. They think that she probably dropped her phone and she went to reach for it because it fell down in like the passenger seat floor. They think when she went down to reach for it, she had swerved over and that's when she hit the guardrail. Now, when she hit the guardrail, they think that her body catapulted out of the passenger side window and she was kind of like stuck at the waist, like her legs were in the car and her waist and she was leaning out the window that way, and that's how her head was bouncing on the guardrail posts for that so many feet. They think somehow the car just kind of corrected itself to get off the guardrail and she ended up flipping out. They think she hit the roof of the car first and went down and hit onto the trunk and fell onto the road after. They think her clothing had flown off while she was flipping through the air over her car, and that's how they ended up on the guardrail, just literally looking like they're placed there. Now, we do know 2 semi-trucks hit her body while they were waiting for the police to get there and during, I think, the second 911 call. So they think that's what caused the most damage to Jaleayah's body. And this actually sounds pretty good, but there's a lot of details that go around her friend group and what was happening that night and just the way people truly acted afterwards that still to this day make people question, is this really what happened to Jaleayah? And honestly, just the way law enforcement treated this case and treated Kim, Jaleayah's mother, really made people question what the hell was going on with this case also. And to this day, this family truly believes that there are reasons to have questions. If Jaleayah was so adamant about Tabi picking her up, calling her 3 times, right? Seeing if she was on her way, letting her sister know she wanted to talk to her when she got there, and just, really being adamant of meeting Tabi, why would she have risked driving? I mean, we do know that Jaleayah was trying to fight Kristen to get her keys back, so I guess, yeah, it is possible she drove herself, but we're really not sure, right? Now, with the car, there was some questions. It just didn't seem like there was enough damage to it that would have happened from hitting the guardrail at the speed it was going, no braking or anything like that. Also, for the theory that she was flipping over top this car and hitting the roof and hitting the trunk, it just didn't seem like there was enough blood on the car for that either. And honestly, there was so little damage to this car that as long as you put new tires on it, you could drive it today. The shift panel had 2 separate DNA on it, but I'm not really sure if the other one was ever tested. And there were fingerprints on the window that were also never looked at. And then when you started looking at the tire tracks on the road, it looked like the vehicle had came to a complete stop after supposedly a place she would have been hit at. And then it seemed to accelerate away from the guardrail. And they think that based on the rubber that was left on the road. The tire tracks were thin, so it wasn't the semi that hit her. This had to have been her car. And it accelerates after the last post that you could find where Jaleayah's head hit. So someone would have had to accelerate that car, right? Jaleayah died instantly. So there's no way she could have done anything. Now, there was blood on the car that almost had ripples in it. Like it was there and then the car drove off and the wind blew it. And there was blood on the door handle of the driver's side. So someone would have had to touch her and then at some point have touched the door handle. Now, the windshield kind of looked like someone punched it, honestly. But I think law enforcement say that her head hit there first. But if her head hit that windshield at right where it is, I have a hard time believing that she would still make it as perfectly as she did out that passenger side window like they're saying. There was also no blood or hair found in this crack at all. So, I mean, is it possible Jaleayah's head hit there? I guess, but again, with the story they're saying, I think that's a little difficult. I guess stranger things have happened, right? The police really did believe that she was alone in her car because the passenger seat airbag didn't go off, which means that someone must have not been sitting there. Now, when they looked into her car, though, they found out that her passenger detection system was broken and hadn't been working for the last like 1,200 miles that she had driven, I think it was. So there was no way, even if someone sat in that seat, that the passenger airbags would have went off. So then that kind of tore down the theory that there was no possible way there was not another person in this car. Another thing about the type of car Jaleayah had was that if it was in a car wreck, the airbags went off and all of that, it automatically unlocks in case like first responders needed to get to you if you're in a bad situation. So her car was found locked, which means that when her car hit this guardrail, it would have automatically unlocked because the airbags deployed. So how in the world, when people got to the accident, was this car locked unless someone did it? And they did make sure there was not an error in this system either, and it was proven to be working perfectly. And like I said earlier, the glass was found inside the car, which means the car windows were busted inward, not outward. And there was also no glass found on Jaleayah or her clothes. And people do look into that her hands were above her head when she was found on the road, which would be the same position they would go if you were pulling a shirt off of her. So is that how her clothes came off? Did someone actually take them off of her? Or did they truly just come off and randomly be placed perfect onto the guardrail? Now at the scene, when you look through evidence photos, I'll be honest, I could barely see any glass at the scene. So the only glass would have been inside her car. How does Jaleayah bust out the window? First, there'd be no DNA of Jaleayah on this window at all. But how does she bust the glass inward when she's going out? And this made a lot of people, especially web sleuths on the internet, think, was Jaleayah really even in her car when this happened to her? Now let's go over the timeline after the wreck. At around 7:35 a.m., police show up to Kristen's house. She was the last known person to be with Jaleayah. Now, there was no answer, but they did leave their card in the door. And while they were there at some point, they did notice there was 2 cars in the driveway. Now, this was November, and if you know, it can be freaking cold in West Virginia at that time. And one of the cars had a very thick frost on it, but the other one was just starting to frost, which we all know meant it had been driven recently. But think about this. Kristen left with Jaleayah on the 19th. You know, she came over, pre-gamed with Jaleayah, and then they went to Brian's house in Jaleayah's car. And when they went to the nip and cue, they also didn't have Kristen's car because they were riding with Freddie. If she was with Freddie at McDonald's, she was still in Freddie's car. Wouldn't you just assume Freddie took Kristen home? So why was there a car at Kristen's house that had just been recently used? Now, allegedly, Kristen had already known that Jaleayah was in a car wreck because Tabby had called her, which we'll talk about a little later. But Tabby didn't necessarily tell Kristen all the details. She just let her know Jaleayah had died. So Kristen would have known why the police were at her house, right? Kristen hired a lawyer almost immediately when this happened. A lot of people think this is a sign of her being guilty, but me being a criminal justice major, a true crime junkie, all the things, I just think this was smart. I think there's a lot of other things that could prove that Kristen was involved in something without it being that she lawyered up. I think it makes perfect sense why she did this, whether she was innocent or guilty. And honestly, was the smartest thing she could have done. Again, innocent or guilty. But again, things that make you think she probably at least knows more than she's saying is things like this. Kristen and her family ended up going and eating at the restaurant Kim worked at just a little bit after Jaleayah's death. The manager did end up calling the cops because the tension was just unreal. And they also knew that the police were looking for Kristen to talk to her. So they did come down to the restaurant, but they found out that Kristen had lawyered up and had to tell the manager there was nothing they could do about it because they couldn't even approach her. And days after they looked at the crime scene, got everything they needed, and had opened back up the interstate, Jaleayah's dad, Kim's father, went to the scene, honestly, just to see it for himself. He took a lot of his own pictures, and he also took his own measurements because let's just say the police barely cleaned this scene up at all. There was still brain matter all over the interstate. It was still on the guardrails, and it was just still pretty horrific when you knew what you were looking at, right? Jaleayah's hood of her coat that had been ripped off and was covered in blood was just left at the scene. A metal earring she wore that was actually found above where her head even started hitting was left there. Why would they not think these things were good enough to take up for evidence? And then there was also a picture of Kristen and Freddie floating around where Freddie's hand was bandaged just shortly after everything happened with Jaleayah. But the police took nearly a month to get security footage from the nip and cue. And by that point, they had erased all their footage because, a lot of those systems can't hold up to a year. It's just a very short period of time. Allegedly, supposedly, all the things someone saw Kristen and Freddie meeting the morning of Jaleayah's death. Now, Kristen was completely hysterical, freaking out, and Freddie had a cut on his hand. And if they were meeting the morning of Jaleayah's death, was that why her car was used? And is that why when the police came, the car was just looking like it was beginning to frost? Now, Nicole was the bartender at Nip and Q that night, and I can't remember who in this story she was in a relationship with at one time, but that's how they kind of had her in their circle. And her dad was looking through her phone one day and saw Kristen was texting her to please not talk to the police, supposedly, allegedly. Also, Kristen's mom was texting her, asking her the same thing. And people were starting to point out that everyone that was connected to this case was starting to get those walkie-talkie type phones. That way they could communicate with each other. They were also able to find out that Freddie had a loaner car at the time of all of this happening. So he ended up turning that back in, and it was never even looked at to see if anything was in it that could have helped the case, even though we know that there were definite points in the night that Jaleayah was in that car. And we learned from Katie's statement later that the fight actually started in Freddie's car. So why in the world would it not be a priority to look at this car and make sure it wasn't a loaner car and just gone and cleaned after he turned it in? I'm so mad at this case. I'm so mad at this case. And the lead detective in this case, that I will get into her later, she told Kim's dad that she would have him arrested and charged with tampering with evidence if he showed up to that crime scene and took photos and everything again. Just completely threatening him, even though they were done. They were letting cars drive through it. Out of everyone in this case, they only got warrants to look through Jaleayah and Toby's phone. No one else's. But we know from records that she called an old friend, Chris, that she had seen at the Nip and Q that night. Now, this guy she was seen dancing with and hanging out with, but this guy was also known to be Katie's ex. So this could have caused tension that night because she was calling him at 3:23 to see if he wanted to hang out. He had another girl that he was hanging out with that didn't necessarily get along with Jaleayah, so he didn't think it was a good idea. But he did say he could hear Kristen in the background, so she was proven to still be with Jaleayah at least by 3:23 a.m. And when we look at Toby's records, we see that Tavi called Kristen at 4:03 a.m. She called and then kind of hung up because she explains that this was when she realized what happened, when she had pulled up to the scene and was unfortunately able to see it. But from 4:03 to 9:51, Kristen calls Tavi 27 times. 27 times. Which means that Kristen would have been up at 7:35 when the police showed up at her house, right? Now, when they had Jaleayah's car in evidence in police custody, they didn't even cover this car up at all, and it was left outside with the windows busted out just for the elements to pretty much deteriorate any type of evidence that was left in or on this car. Kim had to buy her own cover to put on the car in evidence and had to personally ask them, like, will you please put this on? They put it on so half-assed that parts of the car were still hanging out, just literally out in the elements. They could have literally ruined so many things that could have been on that car to help. And this is when we get into really talking about how the family and honestly just a lot of society think the police handled this case so poorly, and some have even claimed corruption. Now, I'm going to try really hard not to lose my cool while I talk about this next person, but just know this one's really hard for me. The lead detective of this case was Camille Waldron. And as lead detective, she never once went to this crime scene. She relied on the crash reconstructionist opinions pretty much the whole way. And let's just be very clear, the way she talked about Jaleayah in this case was absolutely disgusting and gross and unwarranted and ridiculous. She would mention that Jaleayah was plastered at least 13 times in Jaleayah's case file. She just tried to make it seem like Jaleayah was a bad person. She would constantly ask people if Jaleayah was on drugs. And she was just like very loose with information on this case to people that honestly should have been looked at as persons of interest. She talked to Nicole, the bartender, about who she's talking to and interviewing. She told Kristen about information in this case. She also told Kristen from the beginning, the very last person to be known to be with Jaleayah before her death was never a suspect or person of interest. And honestly, just procedurally, she should have been the first person looked at and cleared before moving on to anybody else. She just claimed that she was in the car with Freddie at McDonald's. And Camille just talked really badly about Jaleayah to Kristen, her dad, and her lawyer. She even released information to them that the police didn't know. People just tried to make excuses for Camille and said she was just dumb and didn't really understand right and wrong. Why are they in law enforcement if they don't understand right and wrong? And also, like, what a reputation to have people just talk about you like that, and like colleagues talking about you like that. I would be horrified. Now, Camille did stay in close contact with the medical examiner until the toxicology report came back. And once the toxicology report came back that Jaleayah was absolutely drug-free in her system, she started hammering the drunk driving to people. But she even tried to take statements of Jaleayah being linked to drugs even after she came back completely negative of everything. Now, Deputy Pickens was the one, I think, to show up first on the scene. He at first said this scene was very, I think the word peculiar was used. He at first said there were people involved with this, and even has said there has never been a time that he has seen where someone was ejected from the car and not left any type of evidence within the car itself. No blood, no hair, no skin, no clothing fibers, nothing. But he was the one that said he didn't think seatbelts were used in the crash. Now, when you talk to Tabi about her side of things, she had said that Jaleayah was starting to get really annoyed by Kristen before this night. So she wasn't shocked when they started arguing this night, but she didn't necessarily think that Jaleayah was wanting her to pick her up at first. So when she heard especially that second call on how hysterical she was, she knew she had to go. Now, Kristen just happens to be the granddaughter of the former sheriff. Again, she was the last person to be known to be with Jaleayah, the last person to talk to her, the last person to see her, and she was given 2 days to be interviewed. She said that the Davises had came to her house that early afternoon and had told her that Jaleayah overdosed in a hotel room. But then why are you calling Tabi 27 times in the morning if you don't already know what happened? But then why lawyer up if that's the story? And on top of that, wouldn't you have seen the police card in the door if it was early afternoon? Why would you not call them and talk to them? And all through Kristen's side of things, she was very inconsistent on how drunk she was. There were times that she would remember everything perfectly. And then it seemed like those were the times that it made sense that she would want to remember everything perfectly, if you get my drift. And then other times she just seemed like she was way worse, or maybe how she actually was that night. And Kristen's timing on everything was the one that was the farthest off of everybody's. Now, I know when you're drinking, it's hard to remember really time frames, but everyone else was kind of at least roundabout with each other. She had times that were just completely not lining up. But I would like to say that she has taken multiple polygraph tests and passed them. Now, Katie is a daughter of a former police officer, but she voluntarily went to the police station that morning. Now, her timeline did seem to match the best with everything that we know. She said after the nip and cue, they arrived at Brian's and she went to get into Jaleayah's car. She kind of thought that was the plan. But Kristen and Jaleayah were fighting in the backseat of Freddie's car. And this was the fight about the car keys that Tabi had heard the first time she called, supposedly. She ended up getting back into Freddie's car because it looked like they were not taking Jaleayah's anymore. And this is when they went to McDonald's. And I think in Katie's story, Jaleayah was left with her car. Freddie then drops Kristen and Katie off at Kristen's house, which then Katie calls Chris and has him pick her up. Katie then gets Chris to come pick her up at around 4:05 a.m., the same Chris that Jaleayah was texting earlier. Now, Freddie is a son of a former police officer also, and it was very obvious how annoyed Freddie was about being accused of anything in this case. But Freddie's the only one that does have a solid alibi of not being involved in the crash but Freddie was seen right there on the McDonald's security camera footage. Now, based on cell phone pings, Jaleayah was only on the interstate for about 90 seconds before her crash. So Jaleayah had called Tabi before she was ever on the interstate. Now, allegedly, Nicole changed her phone and number after Jaleayah's death, pretty shortly after Jaleayah's death. Katie would constantly complain about the inconvenience on her family this investigation caused. And Freddie would openly tweet making fun of this case and just being outwardly rude. He would even message Kim on Twitter and would say if she put a pair of Jordans on his feet, he might give her information about Jaleayah. Gross. So due to pretty much every person in this case being related to law enforcement except Jaleayah, right? A lot of people thought this came with a police cover-up. The case was officially closed and had been refused to be reopened before the autopsy ever even came back. The second DNA in the car was never tested, and around November 2nd, 2019, there was luminol finally used on Jaleayah's car. All around, the headlights and the passenger side lit up, also behind the grille and all underneath the car. And the police did not find this appropriate knowledge to try to reopen the case and figure out why there was so much blood underneath and hardly on top, if their theory was correct. And Camille had even openly said she just wanted Kim to go away. And she would just do petty things like leaving over 100 photos out of the case file that was given to Kim. The FBI was told that they could come in and ask questions if they wanted, but when they did, the meeting was abruptly ended before they could even get to hardly any of them. And the official explanation from the police goes like this. Following a lengthy investigation, it was concluded by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner of the State of West Virginia that Ms. Davis died as a result of multiple catastrophic injuries sustained by an unrestrained driver of a car that lost control and struck a guardrail post of I-77. The death circumstances, as determined by investigative and post-mortem findings, indicate that the manner of death was accident. Now, Kim and Toby obviously wanted to look into things themselves that they had questions about because the police really were not supportive of them or how they felt at all. Toby had mentioned that Jaleayah just did not cry like that in front of people, which made her think something had to have been happening before that call. Jaleayah always wanted to be kind of tough and, didn't want people to think of her as sensitive, I guess. And so something really bad would have happened to have her that hysterical. And the family were able to get different experts to prove the theory that Jaleayah was in fact hit and ran over by her car. There was a crash investigator that thought so. There was a second crash reconstructionist that assumed that she was ran over by her car. There was one independent investigator that believes that someone was driving her car, and when they hit the guardrail, she did go out and her head hitting the guardrail killed her, but then they kind of corrected themselves, which caused her to leave the car. There was a keychain that Jaleayah had that Toby had gotten her that she just absolutely cherished. She had it on her keys and it was just a letter J. And after Jaleayah died, Kristen started carrying this keychain around. She said that Jaleayah had taken her keychain off at her house, but she would tell other people that Jaleayah gave it to her. But why would Jaleayah give a J keychain to Kristen, whose name starts with K? Now, is it possible that in this argument for Jaleayah's keys, maybe it broke off? I could see that happening, and Kristen just kept it, I guess. I'm not really sure. Maybe she didn't notice until after they supposedly left Jaleayah at her car. I don't know. But the weird thing was that Kristen just refused to give this keychain back to Kim and Toby until the case was closed. Just downright refused. And it made people think if this was just a keychain and, there was no significance other than Jaleayah left it at your house, why in the world would you not give it back to the family who it clearly means a lot to? Probably especially Toby, since she was the one that got it for Jaleayah. Now let's get into the theories. Everything is alleged. Nothing has been really proven in this case. Now we all know the police's theory that she was driving alone, dropped her phone, and reached down to get it, hit the guardrail, and that flew her out of the car. And then I guess came back up and hit the top of the car and rolled off. People think there's a bigger, definitely sinister type of theory also. They think that there was a fight on the interstate. They think Freddie could have pulled Jaleayah out of the car window and the cut on his hand could have been punching into the glass. Kristen could have been taking Jaleayah's head and hitting the guardrail, and then somebody ran over her in her car. Everyone got out of her car, left it in drive, and let it just roll down while they got in probably Freddie's car and left. Allegedly, people say Freddie told this story. I think Freddie would have made up some crazy elaborate story just to be a dick about this, thinking it's funny. I personally don't think this could have happened because Freddie was seen at McDonald's at the time of this happening. And I would like to tell you Kim's theory, because she is Jaleayah's mom and you know she's the one that's probably put the most hours into this case. She thinks Jaleayah got out of her car or was told somehow to get out of her car. She thinks that the person took off driving her car, turned around, and came back towards Jaleayah. She thinks at this point they pinned Jaleayah between the car and the guardrail. She thinks at this point Jaleayah was dragged on the road by her own car. And there was blood all over the road that would have matched up to this theory and not the police's theory. This also would be how everything would get underneath her car. They think the person then realized she was dead, like, oh my God, and they tried to pull her out from underneath the car, which would then pull her arms underneath her head. She also thinks this is where her clothes were ripped off. And I would like to give my theory because I think a lot of people can see this. All alleged, just my Google research, unprofessional opinion. I think it is very possible that Kristen was driving Jaleayah's car. I think that they got into a fight while they were also in her car, and it's possible that's why they ended up hitting the guardrail, because they were bickering and they weren't paying attention and they both had been drinking that night. And I do think that would make it easier for Jaleayah to go out the window and kind of hit at her waist, being in the passenger window. And I think Kristen tried to correct the car once she realized what was happening. I do think there was a delayed response because they had been drinking that whole night, and that's why she kind of dragged her for a while. And I think when she corrected, that made Jaleayah come out the window. And I think, unfortunately, she did somehow get trapped underneath her car when this happened. I think Kristen could have easily just panicked and maybe called even Freddie to come get her from the scene. I don't think by any means anybody meant to kill Jaleayah this night. I think it was unfortunately just a night of partying that ended horribly for a group of friends. But Jaleayah was the newer one in the friend group, it seems, and the loyalty to a friend group would be with the members of it for the longest time period. I think it doesn't hurt that their family is all in law enforcement or formerly in law enforcement. What do you think happened to Jaleayah? Do you think anybody else was involved? And what parts really give you the biggest red flags? Leave all of that in the comments. And thank you guys so much for watching. Like and subscribe for me and hit that notification button. That way you're notified the next time I upload. And I still got my GoFundMe going for Crystal Young. If you have not watched that video yet, you need to, so you know why her mom needs this PI so bad. And I still have stickers for sale. They're $2 each, and all proceeds go to the Cold Case Foundation, so it is for a good cause. And thank you guys again so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.